everyone. I'm Adrian Alexander with Free the Slaves, the Secretariat to the Caribbean Coalition Against Trafficking in Persons. And we're here today for another episode of Member Spotlight. With me today is none other than Shamere McKenzie, the one and only Shamere McKenzie. And it's great to be able to sit and have this chat with you today, Shamere. Welcome to Member Spotlight.
Thank you so much for having me, Adrian. I am nervous and excited at the same time.
And I would not think that you would be nervous. I mean, you are a stalwart, a leader, a legend even in the anti-trafficking movement at a global level. And I know you've done tons of interviews, but it's good that there is that nerve jumping up still because it shows humility that you know that, yeah, you may have done this 1,000 times, but each time is something new. I just want to
Yes.
welcome you in particular as our newest member of the leadership committee of the coalition. And what a presence and experience you bring. I really do appreciate it. So I'm excited for this interview. I think I've followed your work in part for more than a decade, and I know you've been
Oh.
doing it even longer than that. So I'm really, really excited to let's learn a little bit more about who Shamere is. So we'll start with that question. If someone asked you, who is Shamere and how did she get into anti-trafficking work, what would your response be?
Well, again, thank you so much for having me on the program. Shamere McKenzie, first and foremost, is a child of God. I lead with my faith. My life and my work is centered around my faith. I believe I'm created for a purpose. And my mission is surrounded around human trafficking. So there are various parts to me as an individual, but I will share a bit more about my personal life, which I am the CEO of the Sungate Foundation, and Sungate exists to provide educational opportunities for survivors of human trafficking. I am also the first appointed anti-trafficking ambassador to Jamaica. And that one is still, I'm still processing that title. I also founded two survivor networks. One is the Maryland Survivor Network, where I work with survivors in the state of Maryland in the United States for their personal and professional development. And then I am the founder for the Caribbean Survivor Network, where I also work with survivors in the Caribbean to help them with their personal and professional development. I sit on several boards, several advisory council. I consult with various agencies, the US federal government, state agencies, the United Nations. I just enjoy doing this work, and that's why I think this is my passion, this is my calling, this is my mission, just to touch on various sectors of the anti-trafficking, and to see how I can make a difference.
And make a difference you are, honestly. I mean, just for the last 10 plus years, I'm just amazed at how much you've accomplished. As you mentioned, you're still processing the appointment as an ambassador for Jamaica. I mean, that is probably the first and only country in the Caribbean that I know of that has appointed survivors as ambassadors. So again, Jamaica leading the way. So awesome to hear that. But
Yes.
you are not the same person that you were when you exited your trafficking
No,
experience.
no.
How did you regain your voice? How do you think that that happened? And I love what you said about your faith, and I know that's a very important part of any equation.
Um, so when we talk about like regaining voice and not being the same person, growth is important whether you are a victim of trafficking, a survivor of trafficking or not, right? As individuals, we ought to be growing daily. We ought to look ourselves in the mirror. We have to do, self-checks and ask ourselves, what are areas in our lives where we can grow? How can we develop? How can we be a better version of ourselves? And so, after experiencing my trafficking situation, the truth is I did not want to get in the anti-trafficking sector. If you had asked me 5 years prior to getting involved, actually the year before, a year and a half before my first speaking engagement, my spiritual mom prophesied that I would be doing this work, and I laughed at her, right? I told her, I'm glad the Lord told you I'd be doing this work, but I'm not telling anyone what happened to me, because in the space that I was in at that time, I was still dealing with the shame and guilt and all the other emotions from being trafficked, right? Um, but it was when I met Kevin Bales, who is the founder of Free the Slaves. And I spoke with Kevin, and Kevin really inspired me and motivated me and informed me that I do have a place in this movement and I can make a difference. And when I met Kevin, I was looking at him like, this guy is just absolutely crazy. Right. But reclaiming my voice was a process. It wasn't something that happened overnight, right? Because for a long time, I felt like, my voice didn't matter. What is Kevin talking about? Like, I felt like my voice was taken from me, right? Because of the things that I experienced, right? But with the support of people like Kevin Bales and Laura Murphy that Kevin introduced me to, Dr. John Donahue, various individuals that came alongside me, various therapists, because I went through 6 therapists before I found the right one to help me unpack my trauma. So there were so many different individuals, and I'm calling names and I'm sure I'm leaving out some names. It was through the support of my family, my mom, that really helped me to find that voice, to reclaim Shamere McKenzie, to reclaim who I am. Because what people don't understand is when you are trafficked, you're given this new image, you're given this new identity. And when you exit that life, survivors often struggle with finding their identity, right? And for me, that was a struggle in finding out, who is Shamere McKenzie? What are the things that I like? What are the things that I dislike, right? But I'm here. Um, I was supported by people who believed in me. One of the things I always tell Kevin is that he saw something in me that I didn't see in myself, right? And I slowly started to speak about my experience, but it wasn't just about what happened to me, but it was about who I am beyond my trauma. And that's what I, just came to find, like, who's Shamere McKenzie beyond, her traumatic experience? Who is Shamere McKenzie beyond this one singular experience? Because human trafficking is like this singular experience in my life. I ran track, I did off-Broadway productions, I migrated to the US. Like, there are so many different things, aspects to Shamere. So this was just like one aspect that happened to be a negative one. But when you are faced with things in life, it's not how, people, it's not how you look at those experience, is what you do with those experience. When you're faced with adversity, right, is how you respond to that adversity. Are you gonna let adversity knock you down, right? Or are you gonna rise up? Are you gonna jump over it? Are you gonna go around it? Or are you gonna clear adversity out the way and define your own path?
I love that. That is so powerful because as many times as we may get knocked down, the important thing is to get back up again
Get
and
back
to
up.
thrive, not just to wallow in what someone else did to us. So I love that. And you're so transparent, Shamir. I mean, you went through 6 therapists until you
Yes.
found the right one for you. And I think
Yes.
that's so important for people to know that it's not a one size fits all, and
No.
healing looks different to different people and at different stages and phases of your life. So,
Mm-hmm.
what does healing look like for Shamir today? And how has that evolved over time?
Healing. Wow. As I said, I went through 6 therapists, right? And that is because initially I was forced to go to counseling, right? And there were culture is a part of that roadblock for me, or resistance to counseling, I would say, because I'm a Jamaican, right? And in my culture, we don't talk about mental health. At least when I was growing up, we didn't talk about mental health, right? We would hear things like, "Oh, I'm mad woman that," or "that woman they crazy," or something like that. But we didn't talk about mental health, right? Now, right, in 2025, we're hearing about mental health. There's conversations now in our Jamaican culture about mental health. So when I had my experience and I was told I had to go to counseling, I thought counseling was for crazy people. Right? And I didn't think I was crazy. I think I had an experience and I know what happened to me. So why should I go to someone who went to school to get a degree to tell me about what happened to me? That was my point of view. What I didn't understand was the impact of trauma on my brain. And for many individuals, we don't understand the impact of trauma on our brain. And when trauma impacts an individual, it impacts how they view themselves, how they view others, and how they view the world, right? And unbeknownst to that individual, we don't really know that our actions, our thoughts are guided by that traumatic experience, right? We don't know because when trauma impacts your brain, you don't get to say, "Hey brain, this is how I want you to respond," right? And it impacts individuals differently. For some people, they suffer from insomnia, right? For some people, they use substances. And you as an individual don't get to say, "Hey brain, guess what? Keep me up at night, but I want to eat." We don't get to make that decision, right? Um it's that process, that authentic process that the brain goes through when it's impacted by trauma. And for me, healing for me is not a destination. It is a journey. It is a lifelong journey. So there are various stages in a survivor's healing, right? And as you grow deeper into finding yourself, you realize that there are pieces of you that you may want to heal, right? There are parts of there are elements to you as an individual that you're like, "You know what? I didn't know this about me, and I'm not sure if I like that. I want to work on that." Right? In the beginning, healing for me looked like survival, right? It was about self-discovery, setting boundaries, and really finding my purpose. Like, what is my purpose in this world? What did God design me to do? What is my assignment on earth? Right? Today, for me, healing means living with intention, like being intentional about, the things that I do, the people that I connect with, right? The things that I say, right? Being intentional, loving myself, right? That's a part of healing. That's self-love, right? And this is because that self-love for me is important because when you're being trafficked, there's no such like what is self-love? Someone is beating on you physically and psychologically. You're not even seen as a human being. So healing for me is a part of that self-love, right? And that's really loving myself deeply, right? And it's not saying that I'm conceited, but I remember a time where I didn't love myself. I didn't love the person that I saw when I look in the mirror, right? And healing for me is knowing that I can honor my past by being intentional and not being imprisoned by my past. Right? I could look at my past and said, because of this experience, I am a better woman, right? Because of this experience, I now view life through these lens. And the way that I'm viewing life through these lens, it's not just for myself, but it's how can I be a better human being, right? And how can I serve the greater humanity, right? Healing is a daily choice, right? Healing is a daily choice. It's waking up every day, right? And saying, I'm going to move forward. I'm going to give myself grace. I'm going to be gentle with myself, right? And that's one thing people don't understand. Like when they look at survivors, they're like, depending on the survivor that you encounter, you're like, oh, this person is so powerful, but not understanding that this person may be powerful, but every single day they have to be intentional about giving themselves grace and loving on themselves and being gentle with themselves. Because the labels are there. There are different factors or different sources in society that will try to define you, right? But you have to know how to define yourself and what truths you are going to accept for yourself that is in line with your healing.
That's so much there, Shamaya, that really speaks to, I think, anybody. You don't have to
Right.
have had a traumatic experience. Everything that you said is relevant to each and every individual because people will always look to put you in their box, to label
Yeah.
you, to shape you in whatever way they may want you to go. And you have to know what your God-given purpose is. You
Hmm.
really do. I remember
Yes.
reading something about um, labels that you
Yeah.
mentioned. You're not a victim, you're not a survivor, you're a liberator.
Yes.
And I love that. Talk to me about that.
So I believe that we've all have an experience. We've all have had experiences. We've all faced adversity. And prior to the pandemic, I used to say, if you haven't faced adversity, you haven't lived long enough. But we've all had some experience in our lives that we can define as adversity, right? And for me, one of those experiences was being trafficked, right? And coming out of that, because of that experience, I was then defined as a victim of trafficking, and rightfully so in terms of the legal context, right? Because language is important in how we define an issue and how we respond to an issue, right? So I was considered a victim, right? But then I wanted to move from this place of being a victim to being a survivor, right? And so I transitioned from being a victim to a survivor, someone who has overcome their past in some way, shape, or form, right? But then as I was on this journey of moving from victim to survivor, I realized that I was no longer a survivor, right? I am a liberator, right? Because I'm not a victim, because I'm no longer enslaved. I'm not a survivor because I am more than surviving. I believe that I am a liberator, one who has broken free from the chains of her past and is determined to make a difference in the lives of others.
I think that is where survivor leadership and, as you put it, being a liberator really steps in. It's not just about me being healed, me moving forward, but
Mhm.
who am I taking out of bondage with me?
Right.
Who am I helping to leave their own state of victimhood into being a survivor and to liberate others? So there's been a lot of talk in the movement, especially over the last few years, about survivor leadership. And some of it may be tokenistic, others far more authentic. What would you describe as authentic survivor leadership?
I talked about just now about being a liberator, right? And I said that I'm a liberator because I have been broken free from the chains of my past, and I am determined to make a difference in the lives of others, right? And for me personally, when I talk about making a difference in the lives of others, that is not limited to the anti-trafficking sector. That is to the human, that is across humanity, right? But when we talk about survivor leadership and authentic survivor leadership, it means creating pathways for others. It means how can I use my lived experience to elevate, promote, clear the path, right? Um, it means not being defined by your past. It means being at the decision making table, and how do we create spaces where others with lived experience can be at those decision making tables, right? How do we create room where others can get access, where others can join this movement, join the spaces that you're a part of, right? It's not about you. And whether you're a survivor or not, life isn't about you. That's just my belief, right? So how can I share my opportunities with others? How can I create opportunities given, the gifts, skills, and talents, given the experiences, right, or the opportunities that I receive? How can I use those to create opportunities for others? How can I elevate someone else's voice? How can I push someone up? They said, I believe, and people, many great leaders have said this: a great leader doesn't lead from the front, right? A great leader is leading from the back and pushing his team forward, right? And so for me, how can I push other survivors forward? That's what's important to me. And that's what, to me, authentic survivor leadership means. It means also being respected for your expertise, right? For your insight, for your humanity. It's about integrity in doing this work. It's about collaboration and remembering that there is no space for ego when you're doing advocacy work, when you're talking about survivor leadership. It's about impact. Right? I believe sometimes ego gets in the way of service. Ego gets in the way of collaborative opportunities. Ego gets in the way of how we interact with others, right? Because we make things about us. And the moment that we realize that this is not about us, that we are part of something that is greater than ourselves, that is the moment we can make real impact.
Amen. That is, I hear you, and I'm seeing the work that you do through networks. I watch and I listen to you speak in so many different spaces, and I see you introducing other survivors to those spaces and pushing them forward so that they get to share their expertise, their insights. And you sit back and I see this smile in your face like a proud mom as they step forward and they shine.
Yes.
Is that why you got involved with the networks? You mentioned Maryland Survivors Network, and of course, here in the region, the Caribbean Survivors Network. What
Mhm.
led you to create the Caribbean Survivors Network?
The Caribbean Survivor Network is it's a baby of mine. I've been pregnant with this baby for several years, right? And this is after going, my first international speaking engagement was in Aruba in 2012, in 2012. And I remember going to Aruba and I met a survivor of trafficking there, and there wasn't any community. And when I say community, there wasn't, because Aruba was so small, is so small, that survivor was afraid of getting therapy. That survivor was afraid of, just connecting with other people. And she wanted to stay in contact with me. And I'm a person that believes I should stay in my lane. I am not a mental health professional. And I believe this survivor needed more, right? They needed to be able to unpack the trauma, but they also needed community, right? They also needed to be around individuals that understood their experience, that can help them overcome the experience. And I couldn't be that single individual that provided, that connection or that community. And as I traveled to other countries, I saw this began to be a pattern, right? And I said, well, how can I create a space where that survivors can come together and realize that, hey, you're not alone in this process. The thoughts that you have doesn't make you crazy, that you are suffering from complex trauma and others have similar thoughts and beliefs, right? That you are resilient, that you're powerful, right? And our collective voices matter, right? How can I create that? And so it was in May of 2024, after the Caribbean Regional Anti-Trafficking Conference that was hosted by Free the Slaves, that it was after the conference that I sat at the table and I was speaking to another survivor and others, and just talking about this passion that I've had for a number of years. And it was then that I was like, I made up my mind instantly. It's time for me to deliver this baby, right? It's time for me to give birth to this baby that I've been carrying for so many years, right? Just seeing the need of survivors, especially in the Caribbean, because of the cultural barriers, right, that exist, in the Caribbean. you know, let's not even get into the cultural barriers right now. As Caribbean people, we know some of those cultural barriers, right? So how can I create a space for survivors? And that's how the Caribbean Survivor Network was birthed. Um, but I didn't want it to be a Shamere thing, right? So when I had this idea, I wanted to bring together survivors from all over the Caribbean to be founding members, and they would decide and shape and dictate what the network looked like before we open it up to other survivors. And so through that, I reached out to some allies, and they put me in touch with survivors who have never met, right? So this is all based on the recommendation of those allies. And we have 8 founding members of the Survivor Network that have created the bylaws, that have, talk about the application process. What does it look like? Who will be our members? Right? What would be our core values? And that was so important to me, because when we're talking about survivor leadership, when you're talking about empowering survivors, it starts from the very beginning, right? Survivor leadership or survivor engagement or survivor empowerment is not something that we're going to say we're going to start and then we're going to check that box down the road. It starts from the very beginning. And so for me, how can I empower these survivors from the very beginning to say, you are a part of? And I remember those initial phone calls with those survivors. When I called them, I said, listen, I want you to think about what this network could look like. I want you to bring your thoughts and your ideas and suggestions to the very first meeting, right? And to hear the responses from those individuals, like, I get to do that. Yes, you do. Why not? Why not? Right? And so through that, we began in October 2024, the Caribbean Survivor Network. And I'm just so happy to see what we have done in less than a year. And one of the things that, I don't know, it lights up my world, it lights up my heart, it makes my heart skip several beats, is to see the opportunities that have been created for individuals in the network, right? Individuals who were overlooked, individuals whose voices weren't being heard, right? That are now given opportunities, right? So last week, I was in Bogota, Colombia, with a survivor from the network, right? And that was the first time she was leaving Jamaica. First time on an airplane, right? And when someone is traveling for a first time, you try to tell them all the things to prepare for, but I didn't remember everything. So we had a few hiccups. And now out of that, I've learned, hey, we need to create a document for first-time travelers. Right? And, then I don't have to count on my brain to try to remember everything to say, hey, look for the connection sign in the airport. You don't have to exit and then come back in, right? Hey, remember that, there's a 3-ounce limit for liquids or they will take your stuff, right? Like, because I've been traveling since I was 6. So I've been traveling for over 30 years. Right? And so the things that you often take for granted that you should tell someone as a first-time traveler, I failed. I did not remember, right? But the good of that, the positive outcome of that was that this individual was given an opportunity to talk about their lived experience. They were given a platform. They were at the table with the United Nations. right? And I mean, for me, I'm like, you could share in your community, you can share, on a statewide level, but to be at the table with the United Nations, I mean,
That
for
is
me, it was
phenomenal.
just, I just remember, when that individual got the mic and they began to share, as you said, Adrian, it was like that proud mama moment. Like I wanted to get pom poms and then just bust out, share it, and say, "You go, girl! You go, girl!" Because one voice is okay, but as a collective, when we talk about a collective survivor voice, many voices are powerful. And when that person opened their mouth and they spoke and they gave recommendations to the United Nations on ways that we can improve to address trafficking, it was like a bombshell. It was like a bomb that was dropped. And for me, that's what I want to do, right? We're getting ready to go to Vienna, Austria in June. And here it is again. There's another survivor who's traveling for the very first time, right? Just Monday, I was sitting down with this individual because of where they're located, they have to go to another country to get the Schengen visa, and there's all this different, you know, there's a whole process to obtain that visa, and it's just carving out time. We sat down on Zoom for 4 hours to go through. This is the first thing. Let's complete the application. Let's look at the country you need to go to. Let's schedule a time for your visa. Let's make sure all the paperwork is intact. Let's look at flights. Let's look at hotels. Let's look at how long the taxi is going to take to go from point A to point B, right? And Adrian, that is what I love to do.
And
That
these
is
are
what brings me
practical
joy.
things, practical things as you help someone to
Yes.
grow and to blossom. Um,
Yes.
yeah, it is a proud parent moment.
And even how to, like, towards the end of that 4 hour meeting on Monday, we did some role playing of, I was the visa officer or the immigration officer. And I said, so when the officer says to you, well, what are you going to Vienna for? How are you going to answer? Right? And it's being able to say, hey, I am a survivor. I'm traveling on business by invitation from the United Nations. How to answer that question in that one liner that would, and Adrian, even that question, right? When we were role playing, you can see how empowered and how enlightened this individual was, like the light on their face, right? And how they felt empowered just by answering that question. Like, I am going to Vienna with the United Nations,
Yes. So you're not
right? And
towering,
so
you're standing
these are the
tall.
things that makes me happy. Like, these are the things that, sometimes people take for granted, right? Like, oh my gosh, I got to sit down and do this application. Yeah, you got to sit down, you got to do this application. Because for some people, and this is what I realize in my work, completing applications for many survivors can be triggering. I've worked with other survivors who are very intimidated by completing an application. So you really have to sit with them and complete that application with them. And for me, that was fine. I was like, girl, let's schedule a time. Monday, we're going to meet at this time and we're going to sit down and we're going to complete this application and we're going to get this done. And to see that she had a folder with all her documents and all the things in there. And she's like, this is my folder. I'm ready. And she's like, I'm ready to go. Right. It was, I don't know. Those are the things. And I'm just looking forward to meeting her in Vienna at the airport and say, hey, welcome to Europe, right? Like, I don't know. These are the things that just excite me.
So you're seeing growth, you're seeing the fruit of your labor in such a short space of time. So that must be encouraging for you on a daily basis.
I don't even consider it the fruits of my labor because it's not, I don't consider this labor.
But
What I am seeing is the opportunities for survivors. That's how I'm looking at it. Right. So it's like, this is bigger than Shamere. This really has nothing to do with Shamere. This is how survivors can get opportunities, how survivors can be in spaces that they probably wouldn't necessarily be afforded the opportunity to be in those spaces, right?
Indeed.
Because even when the UN approached me, they approached me as Shamere McKenzie, right, to say, hey, we would like for you to join us in this process. And I said, well, there are other survivors. There's a whole Caribbean Survivor Network that should be a part of this. And the beauty of that is the United Nations heard me. They listened and they included these survivors.
That is awesome. That is awesome. Making space,
Yes,
liberating, bringing
yes,
others with you. Yeah. And you mentioned earlier that you are CEO of Sungate Foundation. Is that
yes.
an NGO that you created as well?
So the Sungate Foundation is an NGO, but I did not create Sungate. I was appointed the CEO for Sungate by Susan Priest. And Susan is a federal agent who created Sungate. Through her work and her experience, she recognized that there was a gap in aftercare services for survivors, and she created the Sungate Foundation, which provides educational opportunities to survivors of all forms of human trafficking throughout the United States. However, due to a conflict with Susan's primary job being a government employee, a federal government employee in the United States, she couldn't continue Sungate. I was actually the first Sungate scholar, the first individual to receive a scholarship from Sungate. And, when I contacted her the next year, she informed me that she had to dissolve the organization. And if I wanted it, I could have it. And who just gives an organization to someone? I mean, she gave me the organization with money in the bank. All I had to do was put my own board together. So it was already licensed and incorporated, had a 501c3 status. And so even today, when individuals come to me and they're like, well, you have a 501c3, can you, help me? I tell them, I don't know. I've never had to do that. Right. And for me, this goes back to when I said that this is my purpose and this is my mission, because things in life just doesn't normally happen like that.
Yeah,
So I'm very grateful to Susan Priest, who, this was her vision. This was her baby that she entrusted me with, right? And for me, it's again, it's liberating. Our slogan at Sungate is liberation through education,
I love it.
right?
Say
And when we
slogan.
talk about
Education
education at
through
Sungate, we
education.
really allow the survivor to define what education means to them. So for many individuals, when they hear scholarships for education, some individuals may think college, right? And for us at Sungate, education transpires beyond college. What about trade schools? What about certificate programs? Right? What about professional development courses? So the survivor really gets to define what education means to them, right? And that is important to us, important to us as Sungate, as one of our core values in terms of empowerment, which means the survivor gets to make that decision. And we come alongside and said, this is your decision for your educational goal, and let's give you some money towards that. Right?
Creative
And
space
for
for
me,
listeners
education is
again.
just one avenue of hope for survivors. It's a tool where survivors can begin to dream again, to build a future that they're proud of, right? Um, and so, and not having an education can be a barrier for survivors. So how can we remove some of those barriers so that survivors can move forward, so that we can create a path for survivors to move forward? And so that's what we're doing at Sungate. We're investing in the future for survivors, because we believe it's worth investing in.
Definitely. With all that you've been doing, Shamir, what would you like to leave as your legacy?
I love this question. I love this question because it's a question that I continuously think about. I remember in my earlier years, I went to a funeral and the sermon was about the headstone, right? And what is the most important thing on a headstone? And I remember that pastor saying, it's not the birth date, it's not the end date, it's the dash, right? And for me, I didn't get it. I had a very slow moment. I was like, the dash, right? Like it's about, right? And when that pastor broke it down about what that dash means, like that's the person's life, right? For me, I started to look at, okay, if I should die, what are people going to say about Shamere? Right? Because people say good, bad, and ugly with someone that, depending on how real they want to be, like, oh my gosh, like this person, or right. And for me, I started to look at what are people gonna say about Shamere? And so that was one experience that I had. And then I remember when Loyola University Chicago heard about my story and they gave me a full scholarship to finish my degree. And I went on campus and I met my mentor, John Donahue, introduced me to a fellow Jamaican who I thought was just like this brilliant guy, Slaney Palmer. And I remember having a conversation with Slaney, and he asked me this question, like, what does legacy mean to you? And we were walking around campus and we were looking at the names on the buildings. And, I remember Slaney, and Slaney is the person I love listening to. He drops so much, the wisdom that he imparts on you. It's just like, oh my gosh, right? And so I remember Slaney and I having this conversation about legacy and looking at the buildings and the names on it. And I remember asking myself, what legacy do I want to leave? And for me, it wasn't leaving my name on a building, right? I'm like, well, that building can come down, right? For me, it was about the impact I can have on lives, right? That is the legacy for me. How can I impact someone else's life? How can, if I was to die tomorrow, knock on wood, and because I'm going to live to 140 years old, so I know like I have, at least another 138 years to go, right? So if I was to die tomorrow, what would people say about me? Right? How would people say that I've impacted their lives? Right? And this could be from something as small as she helped me change a tire, and I don't know how to change a tire. But it could be something as simple as that, because we know as human beings, the things that we considered small, it's very big to someone else. Right? So for me, it's about how do I impact, the impact that I would have. Legacy to me means impact on lives, right? I want to leave a legacy that says that survivors aren't broken, right? People see survivors as these broken individuals. I want to leave a legacy that says, no, we're not broken. We're brilliant. We're resilient, right? I want to leave a legacy that says that systems can change when we center those who have been impacted, right? So sometimes we know we're doing this work and we're like, oh my gosh, it's the system. Well, how can we fix the system? Right? Some individuals don't believe that we can fix the system, but systems can change when we center those individuals that are most impacted.
I hear
right?
that.
I want to leave a legacy that education is liberation, right? That healing is possible for survivors. Like healing is possible when we're intentional about our healing, right? And I hope that, after I'm gone, the things that I am a part of, the things that I've created, like the Caribbean Survivor Network, will live beyond me. That Sungate will carry on beyond me, right? It will get new vision, new leadership, and it will grow into something bigger than what it is now.
Amen. That is forward thinking, and I agree. You're not dying any time in the near future.
No.
There's so much more work to do.
Yes, I have a lot to do. I'm on assignment here.
Good, good. And I thank you for what you did recently for us on the leadership committee. You caused us to look at ourselves through the lens of self-care. That was like a confirmation for me. And definitely, since that day, I have been intentional.
Yes.
I have been intentional in terms of practicing and maintaining that on a daily basis. Our recent coalition newsletter has a section called Shamere's Self-Care Tips.
Oh, no.
Just
No.
nuggets that you shared in that conversation.
No.
And in encouraging us on the leadership committee, I felt other people needed to know. So thank you for the impact that you're already having on our lives. And I know it's just so much more left for you to do.
It doesn't matter the sector, Adrian. It doesn't matter your role in this sector. Self-care is important. It's important for human beings.
Yes.
We cannot pour from an empty cup, and especially the work that we do that's centered around individuals who have been impacted by trauma, right? We cannot pour from an empty cup.
Correct.
Right? So how are we taking care of ourselves in the process? How can we want to empower others when we're not empowering ourselves? How can we tell others to be gentle with themselves if we're not gentle with ourselves? How can we tell others you should be taking care of yourself, but we're not taking care of ourselves?
So true.
Right?
So very true.
So we want to lead by example. Right? So we want to tell others, yes, you got to take care of yourself. And the same energy that you pour into helping others, and this is something I had to learn. This didn't come overnight, right? The same energy that you pour into helping others, you have to pour that back into yourself.
Right.
You have to pour that back into yourself.
So true. So true.
So I'm happy to share that. And I'm looking forward to learning more, because self-care is a birthright.
I like that.
It's a birthright.
Remember, somebody said self-care is not selfish.
No.
Very often we think that, oh, if I do this for me, I am taking time away from what I could do for others.
Right.
But as you rightly said, you cannot pour from an empty cup, and you have to lead by example. And you definitely are one who leads by example. Shamere, thank you so much. I know your time is extremely precious and limited, but you've taken the time to sit down and just to share from your heart. And I really do appreciate it. And we will do this again.
Yes,
before this year is out, we will do this again. You mentioned travel coming up. So perhaps when you do return, we could sit down and get some insights as to how that experience was in Australia.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Thanks for allowing me to be a part of the Caribbean Coalition. I am honored to serve in that capacity. And I'm just honored to, be a part of the member spotlight, where we could just continue to do the work and make an impact and make a difference in the lives of others.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Shamere. And those of
Thank you,
you who are viewing, please check out the podcast playlist for Member Spotlight. You'll be able to see other interviews with other wonderful, resilient, brilliant, and compassionate members of the Caribbean Coalition Against Trafficking in Persons. I'm Adrian Alexander saying goodbye, and see you on the next video. Bye-bye, Shamere.
Bye, Adrian.